Today we're going to talk about group-related influences and how social media has changed marketing. So first, let's acknowledge the fact that human beings and consumers in particular are social creatures, right? We belong with others. We cannot actually survive as individuals. And because of that, we have hardwired need for interaction with others. We are drawn to others and we are influenced by groups like our families, our friends, but also bigger groups like our co-workers or any other group that we either belong to or we would like to be part of. So we're going to talk today a little bit about how all that social influence is going to change the way we make decisions and the way that we behave in general. So first, we already have talked about role theory, right? And to build on that, social identity theory essentially discusses the self as a collection of different personalities that relate to different groups, right? So if you remember, role theory said that we actually use props and different elements in the way we look and the way we behave to basically get into the roles that we are trying to fulfill. This is kind of the identity aspect that basically mostly correlates to that, right? So in my case, for example, I have different selves depending on the group that I'm interacting with, right? When I'm in the university in a professional manner, I'm a professor, right? And I interact in a certain way and I have a certain expectations because of the type of people that I'm going to be engaging with, whether it is my customers, which are going to be my students, or my colleagues, which will be other professors, right? Or if I'm interacting, for example, with the media, because I'm a professor, I may be considered an expert in a certain field, right? And the kind of identity I have associated with the professor is very different than the identity that I actually have in other groups, like, for example, within my family, right? So for my kids, I'm the dad, right? Now, what's fascinating is that this group identity, it arises really quickly. And even with people that we don't have strong bonds or relationship with, being part of a group is going to give us that sense of belongingness, and it's going to make us act in a way that we are going to tend to favor people from the group versus people outside the group, where we call that the minimal group paradigm. And this is a collection of studies that basically put people into groups that are essentially random, people that they don't know. And just because they are part of the group, people tend to like more people from the group and dislike or be more cautious with people that are outside the group. And this effect has been proven multiple times. So the group effect is really strong, even with groups that we are new to or that we have a pretty weak connection to. So the group is going to exert more influence in our behavior as a function of the amount of power that that group is going to have. Right. So there are different types of social power, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of them here. But essentially, what I mean by social power is the capacity that others have to alter the course of our behavior. Right? The things that we are thinking about doing or we actually do. And of course, this is going to be mostly in a context of purchases and products that we use, etc. Okay. First, we have multiple referents that are going to influence our behavior. These tend to be people that are either famous or maybe that they are experts in the field. So for example, if you're interested in business, you might know this gentleman here in the slide, Warren Buffett, for example, who is a famous financial investor because he has been very successful in deciding what companies to invest in and where to put the money, essentially, right? So we use that referent, in this case, the person, to basically make decisions, right? In other cases, what we might do is we might be influenced by information power. Now, this is the idea that some people might know something that I don't know, right? And because of that, I'm going to be influenced by their suggestions, right? So if you go to a doctor, for example, right, and you're in pain, you don't know what the pain is, the doctor asks you a set of questions, and then he makes a suggestion about what you should be doing to either change the situation or try to fix the problem. Obviously, because of, in this case, the education that the doctor has and maybe the experience from years of interacting with other patients, you're going to be more likely to be doing what the doctor says, at least to some degree, because of this information that they have, right? Then there is also legitimate power. Some people are in power because societally we have decided that some structure is actually needed. So that's why we have, for example, police in cities. If you're in an emergency situation, the flight attendants basically are going to be the ones that are going to tell you what you need to do, and you're probably likely going to behave in a manner that is consistent with those suggestions or commands because they have legitimate power in that situation, at least. Good. I've already talked a little bit about expert power. This is actually closely tied to information, right? And the reason why experts have power is because of the information or experiences that they actually have. Then there is reward power, right? Your boss, for example, right? If you do things right, you might get a promotion or you might get a bonus, right? And then finally, there is coercive power, which is the one that exists when there's a possibility of a punishment. Okay, so for example, a judge has coercive power because he or she can send you to jail, right? Okay. And now, one thing that is important to understand about our groups is that we might be influenced by groups that we are not even members of, right? So membership groups are groups that we actually already currently participate in, right? Because we do have a lot of groups that we're a member of regardless of who we are, right? So we have probably a family, right? Probably a group of friends, right? And maybe some sort of professional circle, right? Whether our job is one or another, it doesn't matter, right? Or even if we stay at home moms or dads, right? There will be other moms and dads that we interact with, right? So because of situations like this, marketers oftentimes use ordinary people in commercials for products because this acknowledges the fact that everybody's part of a group, right? So I'm sure you've seen many commercials where, there's a prototypical family depicted, right? It's nobody that is famous, that is well known. It's just roles that we understand because of our societal structure, okay? So the use of ordinary people in commercials, it's well grounded in the fact that we are members of many groups. And because of that, we tend to be influenced by communication messages that are consistent with some of the roles that we already expect to have within those groups that most of us belong to, right? On the other hand, there are some groups that we would like to be part of that maybe at the time we are not, right? So for example, if you are studying like you are right now, you're a young adult, maybe you want to be a professional in whatever field you would like to actually work in the future, right? This is an aspirational or reference group, right? This is something that you're working on right now, setting your steps so that you can actually be part of. Maybe you're doing an internship, maybe you're taking your first job, maybe you've had a few jobs in the summer that are related to whatever it is that you're trying to achieve professionally, right? So because of that, because we are not part of those groups, one thing that works well for advertisements related to any of these topics is the use of people that are famous, celebrities, right? And so whenever we're dealing with a group that we are not part of, but we would like to be part of, celebrities work really well because we might have a hard time relating to groups like that because we're still not part of the group, so we might not even know what the norms are and how things work, but we do know the celebrity, right? So because of that, if we associate the celebrity with the reference group, so for example, if I want to be a financial analyst and I have Warren Buffett uh, telling me that there is a certain seminar that I should actually go and attend because it's going to help me in my career. And there is a good chance that I'm going to go ahead and do that because he's an expert, he must know, he's famous, hence I'm going to be more likely to be influenced by his persuasion or suggestion. There are also negative groups, right? I was talking so far about groups that we are positive, that we are happy, that we are part of, that we will actually aspire to be part of. But there are groups that we just avoid, right? There are groups that we will prefer not to be part of, right? So maybe we don't want to be a nerd, right? Because nerds are not cool, right? In high school or at school. And what we're doing is we're basically trying to not look like a prototypical person from that group. So if nerds wear glasses, then maybe what we do is we get contact lenses so that we don't look like the people in that group. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to distance ourselves as much as possible with that group because we don't want to take part on it. Okay. And there are some groups like this that have been formed around brands, right? There are some people that have a problem with certain brands because of their policies, their products, or how they go about coming up with the products, right? So animal testing for cosmetics, for example. And because of that, there are brands that over time either have had to change their policies or they have had this dark side groups that have formed try to basically bring down the brands or change their behaviors. So, there are groups like this for Starbucks, for example, right? Everybody has an issue with something. And when this force gets big enough, especially with the use of social media, where you can just find people that are maybe, scattered throughout the world that have similar beliefs to you, some of these groups have enough push and strength sometimes alter the behavior of large corporations, right? And it's a whole host of examples when it comes down to things like eco-friendly products, etc., etc. Anyway, good. The question is, why do we actually get influenced by groups? Why do we conform to the requests or norms that are put forth in these groups, right? First, if you ask people, oftentimes, especially in cultures like in the US, they might tell you that they just do what they want, not necessarily what other people tell them to do. But everybody is susceptible to be influenced by groups that they actually want to be part of, right? Like family or friends we were talking about before. Now, cultural pressure is one of the many reasons why we conform. And cultural pressures varies greatly across cultures, right? So, for example, the US cultural pressure is relatively low if you compare to other countries like Japan, where, for example, the well-being of society is looked at as more important than the well-being of the individual oftentimes. So because of that, oftentimes you have a lot more conformity within society as a whole in Japan than you do have, for example, in the United States. But probably the most powerful of all the influences here is fear of deviance, right? If this is a group that I want to be part of or that I have aspirations to be part of, I'm scared of not being part of the group, right? So any behavior that is going to be seen as either negative or unacceptable by the group is something that I'm essentially going to be trying to avoid, because at the end of the day, I want to be part of the group. Okay, so the underlying mechanism for this is commitment, right? If I'm highly committed in a relationship, right, between two people, I'm going to be a lot more susceptible to any request from the other person, right? So when my level of commitment is low, on the other hand, that's when I'm a lot less susceptible to be influenced by the group or by the person, right? So fear of deviance is a very, very powerful motivator, right? The degree of uniqueness versus congruence with the group or unanimity, it's going to vary again from group to group. Some groups have heavy influence on or emphasis on uniqueness, right? You're supposed to look different and unique, whereas others, uniformity is very important, right? So if you have a group of bikers, for example, right? There is a certain look associated with it and behaviors. But on the other hand, there is plenty of leeway for uniqueness, but not every group is like this, right? And then finally, interpersonal influence, which is the degree to which we value being seen highly by others, right? Be esteemed by others. Not everybody is equal when it comes down to this personality trait. And the higher you are, the more likely you are going to conform just to get this importance or esteem from other members of the group. So when brands get to a certain level of status or importance for some of the users, you have this phenomenon that is fascinating where the brand creates a community or a tribe, right? Where all the users or people that are interested in the product but are not necessarily users, maybe aspirational users of a product or a service, they suddenly start behaving in similar ways, right? They have either similar products that they use, they look similar, they behave similarly, they might have similar values associated with them, right? And there are some brands that have reached this status, which is not easy to do, by the way, from a marketing perspective. And probably one of my favorite examples is Harley Davidson. And the reason why it's fascinating to me is because in my case, given that when I was young, I used to own a motorcycle and I was interested in motorcycles, I never understood all the mystique behind Harley Davidson when I was young, because from an engineering perspective, their motorcycles are not particularly exciting. In fact, a lot of the technology is based on products and features that existed in the 40s and 50s. Right? That means 1940s and 1950s. So they are technologically not very developed. And they've tried to change that in the present, in the last 20 years at least, with not very good results, by the way. So some of the mystique of the brand is actually associated with a product that doesn't functionally perform particularly well. So the vibration of the motorcycle, it's actually sold as a good feature. When this vibration was removed by using maybe a better balanced engine than a 90-degree V-twin, or by mounting that engine in a more flexible way that enabled those vibrations to disappear, this actually upset some of the brand enthusiasts because that was not the true raw Harley Davidson experience, right? So you have a product that is arguably subpar, at least from an engineering perspective, yet you're able to develop this cult and thrive around the product and the brand in a way that, rivals some of the absolute best products in the world, right? So there is more to the story than the actual product itself. In this case, the brand is built around an idea of what? Of freedom, American dream, make your own path. So these values that are shared by a lot of people, it's what really triggers its interesting relationship with the community of the brand and its users, right? And this is celebrated every year. Like, for example, you can go to Florida and Daytona, and they have this huge meeting of Harley Davidson users. I used to study in Florida, right? So I actually saw some of this firsthand. And it's truly, honestly fascinating. The fervor almost that you can say some of these people will display for the brand to the degree that they will have oftentimes their brand tattoo on their bodies, right? Yeah, can't imagine that with every brand, obviously. So, but fascinating phenomenon, right? This is, successful branding to the nth degree. So we're talking about the influences of groups. Oftentimes as a marketer, you are more interested in group behavior than you are in individual behavior. There are two reasons for that. One, we have talked about segments, right? As segments being tools that we use to basically be able to target groups that are somewhat homogeneous, that enables us to maybe make product decisions or pricing decisions that otherwise we will not be able to customize to the individual level. So because of segments, understanding group behavior is particularly important. And then there's a second reason why this is the case. Overall, it's easier to predict what a group is going to do than what an individual is going to do. What do I mean by this? For example, if you ask anybody at random on the street, or you try to find out which way they are going to vote, let's say in the next election, whenever that happens, 2024 in this case, it's going to be hard for you to predict that particular individual. On the other hand, if you take 100,000 voters, right, it's going to be pretty easy for you to guess that it's going to be close to 50-50, at least by looking at the last few elections. So predicting group behavior is oftentimes a lot easier than it is predicting individual behavior. So because of these two factors, oftentimes we're interested in understanding how the group functions, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about. So to try to understand the group behavior better, especially decisions that are made as a group, we're going to discuss, I'm going to use as an example, a family unit, right? You can apply this to bigger groups, but the actual roles that I'm going to describe right now, they appear pretty much in every group. You apply this easily to a business or any other larger group than just a family. So let's pick as an example my family, right? So I have a wife, thank goodness, right? And 3 kids that I'm really lucky to have, right? So there are different roles that are taken by one of the 5 of us for different products that we actually buy for the household, right? And so oftentimes there is an initiator, right? Is the person that identifies the problem, and this could be any of the 5. So maybe my daughter will come and tell me, hey, Dad, we ran out of mayonnaise, right? Because she was making a sandwich and she was the last person to actually use the product. So, she will just be the one that initiates the next steps to solve this problem that we have identified, right? So remember, these problems are the difference between the observed state and ideal state. Ideal state in my household is we do have mayonnaise at all times because we like it in sandwiches and maybe for other purposes as well. So in a situation like this, my daughter will have been the initiator, but it's not a role that she always takes. In fact, most of the times, it's none of the kids that initiate any of the purchases, is the parents, right? Good. Then there is the gatekeeper. Now the gatekeeper is somebody who keeps information from some of the people that are involved in the decision-making process. Okay, so for example, in our household, especially when it comes down to anything to do with vacations or fun things that are maybe not the typical things that we do, my wife will actually be the one that acts as a gatekeeper. The reason why is because we have seen in the past, if we talk about some of the information that it's come our way, like, I don't know, there's a new resort that my friends have been in, and it looks really fun, and we're considering maybe going there. If she shares this information with my kids, what's going to happen is they are going to be disappointed unless we actually decide to go. So oftentimes what will happen is we will keep some of this information from the kids, just because otherwise there will be negative consequences until we have actually made a decision, maybe between the 2 of us. All right. Then there is the role of the influencer, right? So every time I go to the store with my youngest kid, Mikkel, he's always bringing me things that he would like us to buy, right? And not only he brings me the package and shows it to me and tells me how much it is, but also he concocts this very complex scenario by which it's totally justified to buy all these chocolate bars or whatever it is that he's bringing me. Right, so he's trying to influence my purchase scenario by just, providing information, bringing things to my attention, etc. Then there is the buyer, right, which, in the case of those chocolate bars, I'll be the one paying for them if he actually convinces me that it's a good idea to have them because, I don't know, we're going to go on a skiing trip and we need to have some energy for when we go in the slopes, right? And then finally is the user, right? Which in the case of the mayonnaise, it's going to be the whole family. right? Because, even though I buy it, and it was that particular purchase initiated by my daughter, everybody in the family has access to the fridge, and they might use the mayonnaise at any point in time. So all these roles, or a combination of these roles, are going to appear in pretty much all group activities. So it's important that we understand this, because when we're trying to convey a message, when decisions are made in groups, if we don't understand who's playing what role, that's going to make it very difficult for us to get to the right person, right? So the decision maker or the buyer might be very different from the initiator or the user. Right? You can see this very, very clearly in business to business. So when you're trying to sell products to a business, the person that makes the decisions about the purchase, the person that influences that maybe technically because they are the expert in IT and you're trying to sell computers or some sort of IT solution, and the person that actually uses that IT solution are going to be very different. Okay? So understanding this process and the roles is essential for us to be able to create a messaging strategy that is consistent and actually effective in a situation like this. So I was talking about business to business. In a business to business context, an organizational buyer is essentially a company that is purchasing products so they can actually operate as a business, right? So if you're making computer monitors, right, you're going to need some components that maybe you're not making yourself. And those components are going to be purchased by the firm, not because the components per se is what they need, but because they are trying to operate as a business, right? And in situations like this, like I was explaining before, understanding the roles, it's going to dictate who is going to be basically contacted from, for example, our salespeople, if we are trying to sell those components, and understanding who's the gatekeeper, maybe a secretary that is not going to give me access to the decision maker, who is the person that I actually want to talk to, or maybe a technical person that is going to be the one making the call as to whether those monitors are going to need specific hardware that we can only supply, right? There's going to be different players involved in that decision, and understanding this process and getting access to the right people is a challenging endeavor, and it's something that is particularly important in a business-to-business. So when companies make decisions about purchasing things, the process tends to be a lot more involved. Many reasons why, but one is because there are multiple people involved in the process. I was talking about some other roles before, but in any decisions, there might be 10, 15, 20 people involved in some of these roles that I have described before, right? Number two, oftentimes there will be a request for proposal that it's written with all the technical specifications of what that product or service needs to be able to supply once that is actually purchased, right? And everything will be clearly outlined so that if there is a breach of the contract, then there are actions that can be actually undertaken, right? And two, it's usually heavily based on past experiences, right? So if you've been a supplier for us for another component, I am a lot more likely to buy some of the new components from you because you're already somebody that we have a trust established, a relationship, because we know that you actually deliver on time, etc., etc., etc. Also, remember when we're talking about decision making, some decision making processes require a lot more time and effort because the risk associated with them is a lot higher. While in organizational purchasing, you're going to have most of the times these kind of difficult decisions, and the reason why is because contracts tend to be large, so the risk associated with them is also high, and because of that, everybody's going to weigh carefully all the options, right? So there is risk involved, like I said, okay? And the risk happens because at least two things. One is the high dollar amount, but two is because the operations of the firm are basically a function, or they require some of these components or some of these purchases. So if, for example, I don't have mayonnaise at home, no big deal. Maybe I can use a substitute like mustard. But if you're selling me a component that it's necessary for me to build a car, right? I cannot just not put brakes on it because my supplier couldn't actually provide, I don't know, the discs for the brakes, right? So it's high risk associated with it. And because of this, there is a heavy emphasis on salespeople, right? Personal selling. The reason why is because being high dollar contracts, having dedicated personnel that are trained and experts in particular manner, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because we're talking about large contracts and we're talking about complex processes that require a lot of back and forth. In fact, a lot of these requests for proposals that I was talking about, they might take months or even years to develop, right? So from the moment that you start a prospect, the possibility of selling a product to a firm until you actually become a supplier from them, oftentimes cycles are in the months, if not in the years. So it's definitely a long, arduous, and difficult endeavor that might actually require multiple salespeople involved simultaneously with support, like technical support, etc. Now, the last aspect that I want to talk about buying decisions in organizations like businesses is this idea of buy class theory, right? Which means essentially that not all purchases are equal because not all of them require the same level of effort and dedication from all the buying unit, right? So you're going to have three different types of purchases. You're going to have straight rebuys, right? Which are decisions that you buy on a regular basis. So for example, this might be buying parts that you've been buying in the past from a series of approved suppliers, right? Then you're going to have modified rebuys, right? These are situations where maybe you have encountered a problem or identified an opportunity area, right? Maybe you want to get that component at a lower cost or with a different set of features, right? But overall, it's similar enough to what you've been doing in the past. So maybe in the example that I was using before, maybe you want your brakes to be a little bit stronger. So because of that, you're moving from a traditional steel disc brake to maybe a carbon ceramic, right? Something that, even though it involves a different technology, is oftentimes provided by the same suppliers. Okay, so in a situation like this, we're talking about limited problem solving, right? You're not going to have to draw the specs from the beginning. It's going to take you some time, but you're probably going to be relying on your existing suppliers. Okay, and because of this, it's a little bit more involved than a straight rebuy that you might actually do almost automatically, but it doesn't require as long or involve as many potential suppliers. And then finally, you have the new task, right? This is when, for example, you need a new set of items or services that you have not used in the past, right? So if you're a manufacturer of cars and now you decide to move from petrol and internal combustion engines to electric engines, maybe the whole host of supplies and know-how that is associated with an electric engine, it's something that will require a different, totally different set of skills and companies associated with some of those components and know-how, right? So maybe in the past, you didn't need to know that much about batteries. Batteries are pretty standard thing, but now when the battery is going to be driving the whole car, the set of companies that you're going to have to engage with to basically have a sufficiently high performance battery, it might be a whole new set of suppliers. So maybe you've never dealt with Panasonic before, but knowing that Panasonic has a very advanced technology when it comes down to lithium batteries, maybe you consider them a potential supplier, right? So this is going to be a relationship that usually is built over months, where you start talks with them about what kind of capabilities they have. They will disclose some of that information, but there's going to be a lot of back and forth, and not everybody's going to trust the other with all the information about what you're trying to do or what capabilities you have, because, you know, this is a new relationship that you're trying to form, right? So these three types of decision situations are very different. They're going to require very different levels of involvement, information requirements, amount of time spent, number of people, and number of interactions. All right. Okay. Now, not only in large groups, but most of us learn a lot of our decision making within family. So let's talk a little bit about how the family functions as a purchasing unit. Now, there are different types of decisions that are made within families, but when you group them all, regardless of what the product or service is that you're trying to buy, there are two different types of purchase decisions. Consensual, where everybody agrees as to A, what the priorities are, and B, which product or service is going to best fulfill those priorities or needs. And then you have accommodative purchase decisions. Those are where different members of the family have different ideas about either what the important attributes are or important benefits are, and to what degree you're willing to trade one versus another, right? So maybe safety is really important for one of the members of the family, and for the other one is price. And it may be that the particular product is safer if you spend more money. Like, for example, if you're trying to buy a fire extinguisher, right? You can spend $100 and buy a fire extinguisher that it's reasonable for a small house fire, or you might want to spend $1,000 in a fire extinguisher that can take care of a much larger fire situation, right? So it might be to accommodate somebody either in price or in performance in this case, right? And this is going to happen a lot, right, within the family. I'm sure you've seen some of these situations in your own families, but if I can give you a piece of advice, in a relationship, there are two options. You can either be happy or you can be right, but not both, right? So, you know, unless it's something that it's of very big importance for you, if I can give you one piece of advice after 20 years of marriage, is try to accommodate your partner, and, you know, unless it's critical, go with the flow, right? So the degree to which there is going to be conflict in families is going to be a function of many factors. Some of the key factors are going to be the degree of involvement with the product that we're discussing, right? So if you really have strong feelings about fire extinguishers because you're really worried about what can happen in a situation like a house fire, right? Whereas maybe your wife doesn't think that's a big deal because, you know, you're overblowing the importance of having 3 fire extinguishers in the house, right? So there is usually a disparity when it comes down to a few decisions, and the bigger the disparity about product involvement, the more likely there is conflict to be occurring within the family. Okay. Also, who is responsible for what? If there is co-responsibility, this usually goes away. But if one of the family members is responsible for certain aspects, right, like providing for the family, there is going to be more likely that there are conflicts within that family, because different members of the family are going to see the different aspects as being more or less important. Then finally, power, right? Who is able to exert more influence over others within the household. And this also is going to be a source of conflict. Oftentimes that is going to lead to accommodative decisions instead of consensual. Consensual. I didn't say that word right. Okay. And then finally, a distinction between two types of decision-making processes within the family. Autonomic, that's when one person makes a decision for everybody else. So it's when, for example, the wife decides that, she's had it and she's going to buy the TV that she wants, even though they've been talking about maybe waiting for a few months, right? So one family member chooses the product, right, and hopes that everybody's going to cope with that, right? The alternative to that is a syncretic decision where both partners are involved into the decision-making process, right? In general, the first type of decisions, the autonomic, they tend to be smaller things, like where you buy lunch, right? Usually you don't call your partner to ask if it's okay that you go to McDonald's, right? On the other hand, products where there is large financial or any other risk involved, like, for example, vacations, right? Where if you don't have a good time, nobody has a good time. Situations like that where there's a risk associated with, usually both partners are actually involved in the decision-making process. So understanding this is important for a marketer because depending on the type of product that you're trying to sell, whether you need to basically message and construct the product based on one person or multiple people, in this case, to the couple, right? Usually, one trend that we see is that, over time, the number of syncretic decisions has increased, right? So couples now make joint decisions when it comes down to more products and services than before. And then another thing that it's also pretty clear is that the more educated the members of the couple are, the more likely they are to jointly make decisions instead of individually.